Hello, and welcome to another episode of What Is This Weapon? My name's Joe, one of the Curatorial assistants here at the Royal Armouries, and here is a Japanese Type 97. That's better. So this is a Type 97 20mm anti-tank rifle. The specific cartridge is 20 by 124mm, so a really big beastie. There are about 1,108 of these made, mainly at Curatorial Arsenal. There are another 100 made later on in 1943, but we're not going to go into that too much. This is serial number 909, so this was made in November 1940. And this type of rifle was introduced in 1939 and served until the end of the Second World War to, we'll say, limited success. Its closest relatives are probably something like the Solothurn series of anti-tank rifles, or indeed the Finnish Lahti. In terms of size and weight, probably pretty similar to that. All in all, we're looking at 52 kilograms of anti-tank rifle here. With the carry handles, that bumps it up to 55. And if I had a gun shield here as well, which is about 4mm of steel, that is bumping the weight up to a massive 62 kilograms. So you've got a lot of gun here. While this rifle did have some initial good performances, especially against some early Soviet machinery, would you believe, it was pretty much outclassed by the 1940s, like a lot of anti-tank rifles. And with an 11-man section to crew it, and this costing 80 times the price of a regular rifle, you can see why there might have been some issues for the Japanese Empire later in the war. Before we take this thing apart, I would like to give a quick shout out to Chris Bailey, who wrote a brilliant article on this thing on forgotten weapons. So if you do want to take in some more detail at a leisurely pace, I'd encourage you to go check that out at some other point. So let's have a look at some of the overall characteristics of this anti-tank rifle. If we look right down the end of this 1.06 meter barrel, you can see a large drum-shaped muzzle brake with some large perforations in it. That will help with the recoil somewhat, but this is actually has a recoil system built into it, so that will help manage it in part as well. As we move further down the barrel, here we've got a gas port and a gas tube underneath, and then we've also got an artillery-style recuperator under the barrel here. We'll have another look at that in a little while as well. Attachment point at the front here for the front carrying handle. This can be carried by two men like a stretcher if you did take the barrel off, but it would also work with 3 or even 4 men. Remember, there is an 11-man section crewing this thing. We'll break down more of their roles in a bit as well. We've got a foresight offset. Here's where the barrel attaches to the body, and you've got a cocking handle here on the left-hand side. Important to note that unlike those other 2 rifles I mentioned, the Solothurn and the Lahti, there's no kind of crank or other mechanism to assist you in cocking this. You have to pull back on this handle and compress the springs all under your own steam with no mechanical help at all. So have fun. We've got the magazine release here at the top. There is a safety on this side, which I'll give you a closer look at later, and an adjustable rear sight on this post to the left as well. Back here, you've got your stock and a cheek piece too. This will protect you from this body as it recoils. And you can see we've got the trigger and trigger guard underneath. Bipod with rear supporting leg and some rear carrying handles at the rear here. So make it quite a bulky all-up device. Since it's off already, we'll start with the magazine and have a closer look at that. You can see it's quite chunky, 7 rounds in this normally, and you do have a slight magazine ammunition indicator here at the back. It will only tell you if you've got 1 or 0 rounds left in the magazine, but still better than nothing. If I turn this over, you can see this rather chunky follower here. This follower at the rear does have a hold open device. This gun does fire from an open bolt, and it is held open on an empty magazine by the back of the follower there. There is a rod which moves across the back of this plate here, and that will trip a little indent which will hold the bolt to the rear. To release the bolt onto either the trigger sear or the safety sear, depending on which is engaged, all you have to do is pull the magazine catch, and that will release the bolt onto those. So if you load an empty magazine in, it won't fire in any circumstance because of that little device there. Okay, so let's get into the disassembly properly, and for that, we're going to have to start down at this end with the stock and the cheek piece. The stock pulls out to the rear and then twists, and what that does is lowers a stop right here. You can see this small little block here at the back is now flat in line here. This is the rearmost safety stop for the recoil here. It shouldn't reach this far, but if it does, that will hopefully protect the firer from any parts of this coming back to the rear. What I'm now going to have to do is take the end plate off of this body. There's an end plate, and that also contains the recoil springs. This is quite a stiff little pin that holds it in place, so I'm going to try my best to push that out from the opposite side. So now that the pin starts on the end plate, we can take that out, and out comes the end plate and these two recoil springs. So as I place this in the light in front of you there, you can see we've got two long, chunky springs. Remember, these are the ones that you're compressing by hand when you're cocking this thing. So it certainly does take some force, and you can see that they fit on these long guide rods here as well on the end plate. With those removed, we should be able to just take the bolt and all the working parts out the rear just by cocking it. And there we go. So as these come out, again, I'll bring them to the front. So we can see we've got two gas pistons here. These are the parts where the gas pushes on and cocks the whole piece. Towards the rear, you've got a locking piece and the bolt itself. So if we lift off the bolt, here you can see a few interesting details. So of course, your classic bolt face. There's your extractor and the firing pin hole in the middle there. You can actually see the firing pin is not captive in the bolt, strictly speaking, and it's got this little wedge on the rear. That wedge is important as it interfaces with the locking piece itself here. You can see there's a few grooves in the top of this locking piece, and the firing pin fits very neatly in the rear one there. So what happens when you pull the trigger? Well, this all starts flying forwards in its unlocked position, which is this position here. As it chambers the round and it all starts to come forward, you can see the locking piece rises up, and that interfaces these two locking lugs with the locking lugs within the body. They're the other side of these very distinctive star-shaped bolts, and these are interchangeable in case one gets damaged. As you can imagine, they are containing quite a lot of force, and they do take quite a bit of a battering on firing. So this is the firing position, and the firing pin will protrude automatically as it enters fully into battery. The way it does this, if I have a look at this locking piece again, you can see there is a little movable block here, and as the locking piece rises up, it hits the back of the bolt carrier here and pushes the firing pin forward. So with the internals out, we can now have a look at taking off the barrel here. That will involve just lifting the spring catch, and then there is a barrel ring which will unlock an interrupted thread, and we should be able to pull the barrel out the front. So with the safety catch out the way, with the help of the pin from the rear, we should be able to rotate this interrupted thread round, and that should allow me to slide the barrel off here. So with the barrel off, all I really want to concentrate on this, I say you've got the gas port at the front here, of course adjustable, and this single gas tube splits into two here at the rear to push on the two pistons on the bolt there. Quite a robust gas system, generally not too much adjustment needed on this apparently. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on the barrel, but the size and chunkiness of this thing should be apparent just from taking that off there. So with the barrel off, the next step will be rotating this, say, artillery-style recuperator. After that, rotate that 180 degrees, and that should allow us to take off the body here. The way we do that is by pressing in a stud at the front here, and that should release the recuperator and allow it to turn. So with the recuperator turned 180 degrees, that should release the body, and when we remove the cocking handle like so, that should allow us to slide the body completely off the rear. There we go. So we're left with the frame. We'll have a look at that in just a second. We can also lift the recuperator out like so. So we'll quickly focus in on the recuperator here. Within here is an incredibly strong spring. This is also adjustable. This is the only thing that really regulates the length that the body recoils. Normal recoiling distance is 11 to 13 centimeters. The absolute maximum before you hit the stop is 15. And anything less than 11 centimeters, and the manual states that you'll start damaging the gun with excessive recoil, and you might start breaking things. This is probably a good time to point out that this gun is semi-automatic only. There were some instances, there was a manual on enemy weapons made by the US in 1944 who mentioned this as a select fire, semi or fully automatic gun. It is not that, it is semi-automatic only. However, some instances of these things firing fully automatic could be down to seized or broken recuperators. When we have a look at the trigger mechanism shortly, that resets when the body recoils. So if your recuperator seizes, your trigger won't reset, you may well start firing more shots than you need to. So this could be the reason why some of those reports might not be the most accurate. So that's the recuperator there. So next we're going to have a look at the body itself. Quite a chunky component, as you can see. On this side, this is the safety here at the rear. Simply says safe and fire. That's what those characters mean, or the equivalent of. This is the fire position. When you put it down into the safe position, you have to pull the knob out slightly and push it down into the second notch. And much like the hold open device activated by the magazine catch, this just lowers a small bit of metal in the way of the bolt to catch it. So it's either held on the trigger sear at the bottom, on the safety sear at the top, or the hold open sear. It'll be on one of those before firing. So let's put that back into the fire position. On the bottom, this is where the trigger group interfaces. The trigger group, when you press the trigger, will push up on this device. And if I show you inside the body, you might be able to see, as the trigger pushes up on this sear here, you can see how it moves out of the way within the body. Other things of note on the body, either side of the sear here, you can see these two rounded nodules. This is the disconnector. This is what says to me that this is not fully automatic. And we'll have a look when we look at the trigger group in just a second, but this is the trigger, very importantly, the trigger reset, these two bumps here. So now let's move over to the trigger group. Now there should be a trigger safety post which comes through here, unfortunately missing on this example, but apart from that, I should be able to show you everything that's going on here. When you pull the trigger, what you'll be able to see is it pushing up the trigger bar to release the sear, and also you'll be able to see these two ears here moving. These ears are the ones that are interfaced by the two round bumps on the body itself. So as the body recoils, it'll push down those levers, and what you can see is happening is it resetting the trigger in between each shot. Again, if you've got a broken recuperator and your body's not recoiling, that's not being reset, and who knows what can happen. Scary stuff, presumably. But that's the trigger group. Other things on the frame, as I mentioned, are the rear sight, which is adjustable with this little post here. And we've also got adjustable parts in the bipod legs as well. This is it in its lowest position, but with a simple twist of the bipod legs themselves, you can raise and lower them in place. It is possible to fire this thing from the shoulder, just supported by the bipods, but I'm almost certain that in any case, you would want to be adjusting the elevation solely using your rear leg here. Fun fact, the assistant gunner's job was actually to lie under the gun and grab hold of these bipod legs, stabilizing when firing, which doesn't sound like a fantastic job because there's the ejection port down underneath. So you've got to make sure you keep your arms and shoulders well clear of 124mm long cases flying out the bottom at you. So with this thing magically back together, let's talk a bit more about it in use. As mentioned, there's an 11-man section crewing just one of these guns. You had your section leader, 4 men to operate the gun itself, 4 men as ammunition bearers, and you had an extra 2 just to look after the 9 horses that were assigned to this. Those horses were mainly for long distance journeys. They would carry the gun over long distances, broken into parts, but over short hops, maybe tactical repositioning, then it would be the job of the 4 gun bearers. They would each grab one side of each of these carrying handles and move it into whatever position it was needed. That would be the idea. And 2 of these sections would be assigned to an Imperial Japanese Army infantry company as their heavy anti-tank rifle platoon attached to them. This gun first saw combat in the battles around Khalkhin Gol in Mongolia against the Soviet forces. Now, Soviets did suffer quite heavy armoured losses during those battles, and 75% to 80% of those losses were due to anti-tank gun kills. Now, they don't specify exactly what types. They do mention they came up against some quite scary 20mm guns, of which I believe this was the only type there. But of course, those statistics do include a large amount of larger caliber stuff as well. However, it was noted that these were effective against the variety of lighter tanks and armoured cars that were still in use in Soviet forces at the time. They used quite a lot of your BT series tanks, and apart from maybe the very sloped front plate of one of those tanks, this would easily penetrate most other areas. You're looking at 30mm of penetration at a flat plate at 250 metres, and up to 2,000 metres, you're still getting 9mm of penetration, so reasonably good performance. Of course, as the story with most anti-tank rifles, as armoured vehicles up armour significantly as you get into the late 30s and early 40s, then these really start to hit the upper limit of their effectiveness. In fact, while their APT rounds were the most produced in 1939, that's armour-piercing tracer, by 1941 and 1942, by far the most common round being introduced was the high explosive tracer and high explosive incendiary tracer. So by 1942, it was being relegated more to the infantry support role. The weight of the projectile is about 160 grams, so those high explosive rounds could have been reasonably effective against enemy strong points, for example. The Americans don't really encounter it too much. This doesn't see a lot of use in the Southwest Pacific Theatre by the time there's a lot of the American involvement there, although it is with some paratroop units for island defence roles. However, when you look at the US manual on enemy weapons at the time, the main things they point out with these things is their ambush potential and where they can cover gaps in defensive lines that larger AT guns might not be able to. One thing they point out is its incredibly low profile and small frontage. As you can see, this thing is only a few feet off the deck on this desk, and so in a small concealed position, you could allow enemy tanks to get very close, and that would afford you larger percentage shots at the sides, rear, or even in some cases underneath the tank, which of course would give this significantly more chance at penetrating. Even without that, I'm sure you could be aiming at equipment, tracks, and all those kind of things to increase the effectiveness of the weapon itself. So while this gun itself didn't see a huge amount of use in some of the most famous battles of the Pacific Theatre, its successor did. The principles behind this design were taken forward into the Type 98, which is a 20mm anti-aircraft gun, which has much larger gas parts and springs, and it's much beefier altogether. Now that is fully automatic, and that could be the source of a lot of misconceptions about this thing. A lot of claims that this was select fire or fully automatic might come from its very closely related cousin, the Type 98. There's also development of this for aircraft use, the HO1 and HO3, which were 20mm defensive armaments or wing guns which were mounted in Japanese aircraft. So it did see use elsewhere, but unfortunately as a anti-tank rifle, its lifespan was limited in a lot of respects. So very, very quirky, interesting, big gun that didn't quite have the big reputation to live up for it. So thanks for listening this week as I shake down the Type 97 20mm gun. Hopefully that's given you a bit more insight into how this absolute monster works. As ever, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and with Christmas coming up, do check out our online shop. Our curatorial team, including myself, are putting together little bundles of goodies for you to have a look at, so do check that out. See you next week. Thank you for listening.